Points of Clash is hosted by Finn O'Donnell. Episode 1, Sinéad Gibney.
Hi, I'm Finn O'Donnell, and today I'm speaking with Sinead Gibney, Social Democrat TD for Dublin Rathdown. In 2024, she ran as the Social Democrat candidate in the European elections and has previously worked as the head of social action in Google and as the commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. With an impressive portfolio and notable work on Irish neutrality, and seemingly the Soc Dem spokesperson for everything I'm interested in, I wanted to learn just that bit more about her. And so I've come to talk to her. And I'm going to talk about her stances, how we can encourage young people to get involved in politics, and current foreign affairs. Sinead Gibney, you're so welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me along, Finn.
So, how are you doing? Just start us off very simply.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm very much enjoying that I have 2 weeks ahead of me without any dull sittings. It's been fairly full on since I started, and I'm taking an actual holiday next week, which I really do need. It's important to switch off when you're in such a busy job. So, yeah, all good.
Yeah, great to hear. So, you are new in the job. Essentially, you've only had the role as a TD for a couple of months. But it's clear to me that even in your roles before, you've been very politically vocal. You were head of social action, which is obviously a pro social progress position. It's at Google, and also you were head of you're the commissioner of the Irish Human Rights Commission. So, but what spurred you to go that step further and actually get politically involved?
I mean, I've always been interested in politics. When I was maybe a little younger than you, I actually wanted to be an actress, and for whatever reason, didn't think I was good enough. One of the regrets of my life, one of the very few regrets, that I didn't pursue it a bit more. But I didn't think I was good enough, and for whatever reason, thought politics was the next best thing suited to me. So it's always been something I've been interested in. I did get involved in students' union politics. I was president in my own the Coleraine site of the University of Ulster. I was site president there. And then I suppose, I mean, the other roles I've had, although it's been quite a a wayward journey towards politics, as in like just lots of different stuff and roles within both the private and public sector. You're right, like they were always leaning towards social and political issues. And I think particularly in my public sector roles in the last 10 years, so as both chief commissioner, but previously director of IREC, I started to learn a lot more about the Oireachtas and about like what I see as the centrality of power. And that, if we do want to make change in the world, that this is the focus of it, the local, like the central point of it. So even in opposition, even for a short time, I do believe that you can make more difference through political roles than you can anywhere else.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And was there anyone who particularly influenced you in starting the journey or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I was trying to think about this beforehand. There's not really kind of one great kind of, political leader or anything like that who's influenced me. Honestly, I think my influence and my motivation generally in life comes from those people who I'm closest to. And I have to say again, in that last 10 years in IREC, I learned so much in the human rights space and so much about, mantras like nothing about us without us, for example, which really dominated our approach to work in the disability space. So I had the opportunity, and I would say the privilege, to work with people with disabilities, people from the traveller community, people from different ethnic and migrant backgrounds. And they're the people, honestly, who can articulate their lived experience so fluently and who help me understand the challenges that I have been privileged enough to avoid my whole life. They're the people who really have influenced me more than anybody else. And then I think my own experience as a single mother, actually, so probably my daughter, like just the experience of having a child alone, and I'm raising her alone now with huge support from my own parents. But, that definitely helped. So my daughter's 24 now, so this is quite a while ago, but that definitely helped my activism, if you like, and to get more involved in what you can actually do to change people's lives who have barriers in life. I always caveat that by saying that, I came from a background of means, so I didn't necessarily face the same challenges that many people parenting alone do. And of course, most people who do parent alone are women, but it did teach me about their experience, and it motivated me to get involved in an organization called One Family, where I did a lot of work, to break down those barriers that single parents face. And then, of course, women in politics definitely do. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is somebody who I really look up to as just charting her own path through politics. And I also thought Angela Merkel was an incredible politician as well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
being a woman in politics is a particular experience. So you do, of course, seek out other women who've managed to hold their own.
And in relation to something that you've worked on, I'd say that I would, the SocDem position I'd say is quite like pro social progress. So you worked as head of social action in Google, and you probably worked on diversity hiring and practices and things like that. When we see other firms, other multinational firms, rolling back DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards, is that kind of disheartening to see? Because that's somewhere where you come from, something that you come from, something that you probably believe in. Is that disheartening to see in other firms?
Yeah, it is hugely problematic. Now, my role in social action was not DEI actually, but I did have a lot of involvement in that broader space. Mine was specifically how we engaged with social issues affecting the community where we're based. So very much external facing rather than the EDI programs, which were more internal. And I was there at a time when it was really growing, when the awareness of the need for greater inclusion and diversity in organizations was growing. So it was a real hot topic and people were interested in it. Um, and now, yes, it is hugely concerning to see it being rolled back. And some of my friends who are still in the multinational sector, are contacting me to tell me how problematic it is that these programs are being removed, because they really will threaten the ability of a diverse group of people to progress within these
Yeah,
companies. And it is a blanket attack from the US right now, because it's not just companies, it's programs, obviously, like USAID. They promote a lot of EDI and diversity and equality programs that aren't in the workplace, but programs that save people's lives, that allow women to thrive in some of the poorest parts of the world. They're all being cut back. And this is a real regression from just decades that we've seen so much work go into progressing women's rights.
yeah. And does that say to you that we need to be looking more at maybe enshrining these requirements in legislation than kind of just leaving it up to companies to maybe take on a head of social action or take on these DEI programs? Should they be enforced by law or by policy or something like that?
Yeah, that is a position I do support greater legislation and regulation for companies generally and specifically within this space. Absolutely. And it's a position I've always held from since I left Google, where um, I really value the opportunity I had there to work in the social action space. But ultimately, I was working along. So it was social action was the title we gave it, but it's corporate social responsibility, which as a broader kind of field is very self-regulated and self-serving. Now, the self-serving I don't mind so much, because if that's what motivates a company to do something, that's okay. But the self-regulation means that companies would have programs under the CSR banner that ranged from putting recycle bins in their canteen right through to seconding staff into NGOs. Like, obviously,
Yeah,
that the spectrum is really sophisticated and a big commitment. Putting bins, is really the very least you would expect of a multinational corporation. But what I'm trying to demonstrate, I guess, is that it's just too loose a banner. And it seems in a lot of organizations quite a box ticking exercise to say we're doing CSR. And my belief is that the only way to elevate that priority above or even in comparison with the profit line of an organization is to put it into hard law. And there's a really interesting growing recognition of that within the human rights space, and business and human rights is kind of emerging as a potential way in which that regulation might be strengthened to make it more of a hard requirement rather than an opt-in for companies. Yeah.
yeah. And that's something that then you'd be working towards in your politics right now. So obviously something that's been very impactful in the last 2 weeks is quote unquote Liberation Day, Donald Trump's tariffs. But where do you stand firstly on the idea of these reciprocal tariffs?
We're very much opposed. Obviously, I mean, he's taken a wrecking ball to the world economy right now, and he's also hugely problematic in terms of how do you deal with somebody who's so scatty and just back and forth on these decisions. And really, just the disruption is huge. Our position from the outset has been that the EU needs to be very careful not to get into the tit for tat. That's where Ireland could be particularly threatened. where sectors might be impacted if certain tariffs are added to lists that mean that Ireland's economy is particularly exposed. And also, I have been critical of. I think, I mean, this is an area we've known that we've always been vulnerable because of our tax system, because we know that there's a lot of profit shifting goes on in Ireland. So even if if we do get into, say, the pharma sector being penalised, there's a massive amount of profit shifting that can happen without one job being moved in Ireland, and that will be an easy win for Trump or for anybody else. So, and it's not just the pharma sector. Obviously, we know that profit shifting goes on in multiple sectors, including the tech sector where I used to work, and that is a vulnerability. And I think because we've known it for a long time, we also would have liked we have always called as a party for better investment in infrastructure and public services from the government, particularly during these windfall years. And really, we have not seen, for the amount of public spending increase that we've had, any real, infrastructure to show for it that would help
And
now.
yeah. And do you think that that was his original goal behind the tariffs? What do you think his original goal was? Was it just to encourage like less trade, to end the trade deficit, or was there something deeper than that?
Well, I mean, he's obviously been interested in tariffs since the 80s. So, honestly, I think Trump's main motivation is his own pocket. I know that sounds very, basic, but it does seem, I mean, the way he talks about, for example, Gaza and potentially ethnic cleansing an entire country so that he can build a Riviera, a grotesque dystopian Riviera over there. The way he talks about Ukraine now, where it's just simply carving up a territory for monetary gain. I do think a lot of his motivation is coming from a very transactional and profit-based perspective, with very little concern for the fallout and consequences of his actions. But he's blundering. He has a lot of people around him who are appointed because they won't challenge him, and who are just simply not capable of doing the jobs that they've been appointed to. And I have huge concerns over what that's going to mean in terms of the pathway. I mean, and I think Europe is best to hold steady. And I mean, I certainly think that's a unified approach from across the Irish
Yeah.
political spectrum, but probably further afield within Europe as well, because we've seen how he pulled back on the Canada and Mexico. He's pulled back on indeed this global range of tariffs. So I think just let's hold tight, because what I've held all along is that the one place where he will get enough pressure to take a change of course is from his own domestic situation, and that is
Yeah.
starting to happen.
Yeah, and we did see that with his announcement of the pause of the tariffs, which was quite immediate, like quite
Yeah.
unannounced. Well, he didn't even announce it himself. So I was going to ask about what you think the European and the Irish response should include. You've kind of gone into that there already. So who do you think the tariffs or will affect the most, or who are they affecting the most as it stands?
Well, I think the American people will be most affected in terms of consumer prices. But if you look at the global tariffs, like the countries with the highest tariffs, the ones who have the least ability to combat them. So I think some of the poorer countries on that list, particularly in Asia, will be really negatively impacted. And you saw that some of the kind of responses where they were not happy to, but had to kind of offer a 0% response. They're the countries who will be particularly impacted. We have some safety in numbers in Europe because we are such a big trading bloc. We have a greater power, but America does have escalation dominance, if you like. So it does have the bigger market share compared to Europe. China, of course, beats US. So, if it gets into the escalatory tit for tat, European jobs, European consumers, and European economies are going to be hugely hit by this.
Yeah, and you mentioned smaller countries there, things like Lesotho and Vietnam being hit with over 50% tariffs, kind of insanity,
Yeah, and
as
it's
we can
just,
see it.
yeah, pure bullying.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd just like to bring us on to a topic that you've been quite vocal on, something that I was lucky enough to see you speak on in the Dáil, the Irish neutrality and the triple lock. So you obviously had this in your private members business in the Dáil a few weeks ago, in which you got to speak on it. But I'm sure a lot of people are going to wonder, first up, what is the triple lock?
So the triple lock is basically a backstop to our neutrality. So when we were negotiating to cement our membership of the European Union in the Nice and Lisbon treaties in the noughties, 2002 and 2009, there was concern that becoming more embedded into the European Union would potentially threaten our neutrality, because there was discussions at that stage that there could be greater military cooperation across EU member states. So the triple lock was essentially brought in to comfort the Irish people that neutrality would not be threatened by our increased EU membership. And it says that to deploy troops above 12 personnel overseas, that we have to have three things: a government approval, a Dáil approval, and then finally a UN mandate. And that is secured by discussion at the UN Security Council. And that's basically how we approve it. So up to 12 administer consent troops overseas without any debate anywhere. And then once it kicks in over 12, then these three mechanisms have to be in place.
Yeah. And so do you think that so the government is suggesting a series of reforms, it says, to the triple lock. Do you think with such like high escalation, such like global uncertainty right now, particularly in Gaza and Ukraine, is it finally time to reach these reforms?
I don't believe so, no. I think the reforms that are put forward, I mean, first of all, in their manifestos, Fine Gael didn't even mention the triple lock. So for the last election just a few months ago, Fianna Fáil did mention it, but they mentioned reform rather than removal. But essentially what is now being put forward to Cabinet, what has been put forward to Cabinet and will soon be hitting the Dáil floor, is a proposal to dismantle it completely. So they have proposed that the Security Council can no longer do it, and therefore that the UN Charter, the principles of the UN Charter, will be adhered to, which is a very, I mean, the UN Charter is so broad to make that statement meaningless. Like, it's impossible to actually see how that is. It's not a UN mandate, basically. So they are hoping to dismantle it. That is their plan. And no, I believe that during a time of global conflict and instability that we are currently in, that this is exactly the time to double down on our support for and from the United Nations, and on the principles of multilateralism and global order, which we have spent 8 decades building up in both the UN and now the EU. And there is an increasing militarization of the European Union, which we as Social Democrats have done our best to resist. But the government parties, particularly Fine Gael, who are members of the EPP political grouping in the EU, they are within a grouping who see the EU as a military bloc. I mean, the military side of things has always been more NATO than the European Union. The European Union was set up as a peace project after World War to prevent war. So I find it really disheartening that the EU is choosing to go down this road. However, I do respect that at domestic, defense is a domestic competence. So I respect that there are countries all across Europe who are feeling the increased pressure of a threat of war from Russia and who feel the need to increase defense spending. I do fully respect that. Ireland is never going to be a military power, and our strength, I believe, is in the promotion of peace, diplomacy and human rights. We have a role to play. We have the longest standing record of peacekeeping of any country in the world, and we need to maintain that. But if we retreat to regional blocs, if we remove the UN mandate from the triple lock and align ourselves so closely to the EU and the military projects that the EU is running, then we lose our ability, our credibility as a peacekeeper nation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think, would you go as far to say that there is a government effort to dismantle Irish neutrality?
Yes, I really would. And I find it very disheartening as a new TD to see the government on one side of their mouths speak about neutrality and their support for it, but on the other hand, take so many actions which clearly undermine that position and which do threaten neutrality.
Yeah. So so even recently, we've seen examples of what the government is portraying as maybe a breach of like ships in Irish economic waters. This is something that's happened before. Just to use the example of the of ships that might have appeared in Irish exclusive economic zones earlier this week. Do you think that there's certain emphasis being put on this example in where other examples this might have not been put so much effort on because the government is trying to attack our neutrality in some way or make media or make the public kind of scared about this.
Yeah, I do think scaremongering is a tactic that the government is using. I know people are scared, and I know people are concerned about increased escalation of war across our country, particularly from Russia, given where we are in Europe. And the subsea cables is a whole kind of part of that people are afraid about, what could happen. So I think it's not that I know we need to talk about these things, and I know we need to assure people and comfort them, but I don't believe that the government gives out accurate information about what the threat is and what a response could be. It's impossible for us to patrol subsea cables. Like, it's not possible. They're too big. Like, they literally go in a line across the Atlantic. So no matter what we do, it's not going to be possible to police them. But at the moment, I am hugely critical of the government's underfunding of the military, because they have allowed through successive government tenures for our military to become so defunded as to be defunct at the moment. We don't have enough vessels in the sea to operate at a basic level, and we also have a huge retention and recruitment crisis in our defence forces. So those are the places we need to invest. That's what we need to do: get our sonar and our radar competence back, get us to a point where we can function, not be focused on buying fighter jets or combating.
So from that, would you then support Simon Harris's recent decision to opt into intelligence sharing programs? And
honestly, it's not an area that I've had enough time to look at just over the weekend. I know this has just come up, so yeah, I don't honestly have a clear answer on that. What I would say, though, in relation to that is there are a lot of ways that we can contribute to the defense of the European Union without military activity. And I do think we need to, as a country and as a globe, have a conversation about what war is now, because it's not all on the battlefield. There's so much that happens in the cyberspace, for example, and Ireland, as a unique country with so many tech companies headquartered here, has a potential role to play in that part of it. But we also have to be very careful of the use of technology in war and how these companies are developing artificial intelligence, for example, that can be deployed in ways which are incredibly inhumane. So we need to be more honest and show political leadership, and not just take what we know is going to instill fear and kind of push people to supporting radical military escalation.
Yeah. Finally, I'd just like to ask you about young people in politics. Do you think it's important that we get young people, that we get maybe underrepresented groups as well, involved in politics in Ireland?
I do, and at every stage of life, there are people who are interested and less interested in politics, and I think that's always important to remember, because people give out about young people not being engaged in politics. But from my engagement with people at all ages in society, there is always people who are interested and always people who are not. But for me, I get so much energy from young people. I learn so much from young people. You guys are going to be taking the mantle, and it's so important that we listen to you, because you're experiencing an outlook and a perspective that nobody in our generations have had to encounter. And I think it's changing how you guys are approaching the world. My own daughter is 24, and she's taught me so much about young people's attitudes towards gender and sexuality and mental health and climate. And these are all really important areas for our future. I think the voting age should be reduced to 16. I think we need to see greater political involvement, but we also need to accept that some people choose not to be as politically involved. And that is a huge threat to democracy, disenfranchisement. So we need to make sure that we do everything to help people understand how law and policy affects their lives, and how they can affect the law and policy that affects their lives. So yeah, I want to see, I mean, the PolSoc course, is that what it's called? Yeah.
Politics and society. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge step, I think, because otherwise people have had to kind of go towards political parties, where this is a great way, I think, for younger people to see the spectrum before they make that choice. And I also think one of the things younger people have to do is challenge their parents and the people in their lives who are from older generations to break away from the tradition of politics that is so dominant in this country, the dynastic Civil War parties who just have a hold. I meet people from the younger age groups who just say, well, I just vote how my parents voted. You're just like, no, please stop. Please stop. Vote on the lines that make a difference to you, and then tell your parents why you're doing that. I mean, don't tell them how to vote, but tell them why you're voting differently if you are.
So you said that you support a number of changes that we could make to help young people get more involved in politics, like lowering the voting age. But is there anything else that young people can do themselves to kind of understand more about politics, or like there is a disconnect obviously between like the realm of politics and the world that young people are living in. So what can we do to bridge that gap, do you think?
I mean, I think that there is a disconnect, but yet there has never been more information available to people. So I think honestly, the biggest thing is media literacy, understanding the sources that you're reading and what is credible and what is not. Like that is the most important thing. And I know younger people are more sophisticated with that than anybody else. There is an understanding that a lot of what they see is not from trusted sources, but it's about then choosing to reject what is not from a trusted source. And that's hard because obviously we know that people are being influenced in ways that pull them down rabbit holes and pull them away from sensible ideas, you know. So I think that I don't know, media literacy is probably the wrong word for it, but just being more discerning about what you
Yeah,
choose to read.
yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. It's been really great to talk about all these topics with you that I'm interested in, that you're interested in, and clearly vocal about. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Finn. Enjoy your day.
Thanks for sticking around to the end. The Points of Clash podcast is hosted by Finn O'Donnell. For conversations that matter, search Points of Clash podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Instagram. Thanks for listening.